Greetings, Honorable Board of Examiners, and also my thesis supervisor, Mr. Akhmad Akbar Susamto. My name is Gautama, and I thank you for the opportunity to present my bachelor's thesis of the International Undergraduate Program with the title of Subjective Well-Being Among Self-Employed in OECD and Non-OECD Countries, Evidence from 80 Countries. This presentation will be presented along the lines of introduction, literature review, methodology, data statistics, results and discussions, and finally conclusion. Moving on into the introduction section. As a background, self-employment is a major job sector comprising of 12 to 80% of total employments across countries in the world, with unique employment facts such as working longer hours, obtaining lower initial earnings and earning growth, and also experiencing higher job stress. However, an interesting fact is how self-employment has a positive correlation with subjective well-being and job satisfaction. We found two problem categories in the policy sense and literature sense. First, government have been prioritizing GDP as the main measurement of economic growth, which may not accurately represent well-being of the citizens and possibly affecting suboptimal economic development policies. In a literature sense, there are mixed findings utilizing different and incompatible methods in research, leading to a more biased findings. We found two research questions to be addressed in this paper, which will be answered by the following research objectives, which are to examine the increase of subjective well-being among self-employed individuals globally, and also to determine the differences in subjective well-being among self-employed individuals between OECD and also non-OECD countries. This research aims to contribute five major points, which is first to provide or propose alternative economic growth measurements in the form of well-being as the main outcome of policies. We also want to explore the impact of self-employment on subjective well-being. We also want to address methodological challenge by utilizing a robust research design. Fourth, we want to provide a comprehensive perspective by understanding the complex mechanisms between subjective well-being and self-employment. And finally, we want to contribute to future research by creating a robust and a generalized base for future studies of well-being and self-employment. This research will be focused in investigating the relationship between self-employment and subjective well-being globally, and also focusing on the usage of using the social survey, world value survey. There are several limitations of this paper to be expected, which is the high data variability between the countries in the world value survey. We want to also to focus on the self-employment variable, especially on the results and discussion section. We also focused subjective well-being as the main outcome, neglecting other dimensions of well-being. And finally, we can only offer insights but does not directly examine the policy implementation in this topic. Moving on into the literature review. As the theoretical framework, this research discussed how subjective well-being is an accurate measure of well-being, since it includes a comprehensive measure by including happiness and life satisfaction nuances, as suggested by Kahneman and Diener. This translates to an economic framework such as the capability approach suggested by Amartya Sen, who made indifference curves based on each individual's capabilities to achieve their own respective highest welfare. The Buddhist economics frameworks also offer additional insights by contrasting the hedonic happiness neoclassical economic use and using eudaimonic happiness instead to provide a more harmonic and sustainable well-being for all beings and environments. And finally, connecting to the self-employment motivation, this research utilized Shamtarian's creative destructions to lay a basis of how entrepreneurs is driven by innovation and not only capital accumulation. As the first empirical review, this research will utilize the OECD well-being framework, which aligns with our theoretical framework by utilizing key dimensions of well-being presented previously. Therefore, this will act as the main reference of data points for the estimation model. Furthermore, this research also found in its literature review the increase or decrease of well-being among self-employed, where major mechanisms found are from income level stagnations effects, such as found by Easterlin and argued by Yang and Murgas, positive effects from religiosity level due to positive emotions as found by Vishkin and others, conflicting evidence in gender effects, positive effects of marriage, and also positive effects of higher health status. Moving on into the methodology section. This research will utilize a binary response model, or also known as the logit model, in order to overcome the drawbacks of linear probability model, which may provide inaccurate interpretation. The model will utilize a cumulative distribution model with the response probability for y presented on the second line. The coefficient from the response probability model does not have a direct interpretation in the magnitude sense and should be done through average marginal effect, or AME, by deriving the model into a probability distribution function. And this, in a sense, will act as the coefficient of interest for interpretation. Furthermore, to add robustness and allowed by the categorical nature of the dependent variable, this research will also use ordered logit model for a deeper dive for each subjective well-being measures from 1 to 4. The empirical model will be based on Buchel and Buro and also Bender and Code, which will use self-employment dummy variable supported by economic, social, and country controls. This model will also utilize interaction terms of major well-being drivers discussed in the empirical review, and this is to find unique results among self-employed, as seen from the models 3 to 8. Validity tests will be conducted for logistic regression assumptions as suggested by Tabachnik, which is to first test linearity in the logit model and then checking for multicollinearity amongst the independent variables. Moving on to the data section. This research will utilize World Value Survey, or WVS, to allow a global representation analysis utilizing wave 6 and 7 to provide a more generalized findings across cross-sectional data while also allowing the comparison of OECD samples. This will be supported by several additions from World Bank, PolTV, and also Ottawa University for the country controls. The dependent variable is subjective well-being, measured by the question, in the present, do you feel very happy, rather happy, not very happy, or not at all happy? Independent variables include all general employment types, which are full-time, part-time, non-labor, and self-employment. And the control variables are based on the OECD well-being framework, but not comprising exhaustively of it, with the economic controls of income, log income, and age, social controls of health status, religiosity level, gender, education, social class, and marital status, while the country controls include democracy participation, level of GDP growth, GDP per capita growth, and also the control of corruption. The descriptive statistics of each variable are as such, which in essence, most of the samples are either happy or very happy across employment types, and income level has a relatively normal distribution. Moving on into the results and discussions. From the validity test, we found that in the link test, the result shows how the hat or the linear predicted value is significant at the 1% level, which indicates that the linearity between the dependent and independent variables exists. While at the hat square, or the linear predicted value squared, is insignificant at the 10% level, suggesting that the model should not have predictive power by chance only. In the multicollinearity test, we measure the degree of linearity present amongst the independent variable, which can be measured by analyzing either the tolerance or the variance inflation factor, or VIF values. The values are all within the acceptable ranges except for the income and log income, which is to be expected. The main logit model shows that the self-employment increases subjective well-being by 1.3 percentage points compared to being unemployed, while full-time, part-time, and non-labor increases are 2.6, 1.9, and 3.9 percentage points respectively. Health status, religiosity level, being female, being married, and also having a higher social class has a positive effect on subjective well-being. Meanwhile, education, democracy participation, and civil law controls shows negative effect, while the latter two variables showing not so robust results. Corruption control shows positive effect on the subjective well-being and is robust. And an interesting finding is how effects of income and GDP per capita aligns, and this indicates a robust translation from the individual data to the country level data. Only 3 interaction terms are significant among self-employed, where an increase of income by 1 level decreases subjective well-being by 0.6 percentage points. Being married decreases subjective well-being by 2.4 percentage points, and 1 level increase of health status will decrease subjective well-being by 0.8 percentage points. These findings first show an agreement with the Easterlin Paradox across cross-sectional data among self-employed, while a possible explanation is that those self-employed may not utilize maximally the benefits of their spouses in increasing their subjective well-being due to their limited leisure time from their ventures. Finally, negative effects of health status may be so due to overestimating one's health and underestimating their well-being that the individual does not notice the impact on their well-being. Finally, in comparison between OECD countries have significantly higher percentage point increases in all employment status, with self-employment showing the greatest difference of almost 3 times the increase of non-OECD countries. Higher magnitudes in OECD countries are most likely attributed to its superior facilities and benefits for employment compared to non-OECD, especially in noting how most OECD countries hold the highest share of successful entrepreneurs per capita. An interesting anomaly is regarding the negative coefficient in GDP per capita, while income has a positive coefficient amongst OECD countries, intuitively showing how an increase in GDP per capita will decrease subjective well-being. However, a 1-level income increase will still increase subjective well-being amongst OECD countries. This results is actually aligned with the findings of Proto and Rusticini, where the research suggested that an increase usually followed an increase in aspirations in income. We will then deeper dive on the probability of each variables of being in a subjective well-being category through the ordered logit model as shown from the tables here and here, where basically the findings in the ordered logit estimation model is very similar to the logit model, but with more depth to each subjective well-being measurement. In summary, self-employment and part-time shows a similar magnitude of marginal effects of subjective well-being, while part-time employment reported the lowest magnitude of decrease or increase in association with the feelings of not at all happy, not very happy, somewhat happy, and very happy respectively. On the other hand, being in non-labor employment shows the highest magnitude of increase or decrease in subjective well-being. Intuitively, this shows how full-time employment will not make the individual extremely happier or unhappier, in essence a safer option of all employment types. Self-employment and part-time employment will make the individual happier or unhappier than full-time employment. Meanwhile, non-laborers can be seen as the riskiest option, making the individuals the happiest or unhappiest amongst all employment statuses. Other variables share similar effects towards subjective well-beings, including the interaction terms, albeit the different magnitudes and also the different interpretations. Moving on to the conclusion section. So in essence, the logit model results reveal the positive effects on subjective well-being for different employment types, with self-employment having the lowest increase and non-labor employment having the highest increase compared to being unemployed. In addition, ordered logit estimation confirms that the self-employment and part-time employment have similar magnitudes of subjective well-being effects, while non-labor employment exhibits the highest changes. Moving on, we found that income shows contrasting effects between GDP per capita and individual income, with the Easterlin Paradox being implicit in non-OECD countries but not in OECD countries. Subjective health status, religiosity level, being married, higher social class, and positive corruption controls positively influence subjective well-being, while education has a negative impact. Age, participation in democracy, and civil law control shows less robust results. Interaction effects between income level, marital status, and health status for self-employed are also identified, and OECD countries exhibit higher SWB effects for all employment types compared to non-OECD countries, especially in self-employment. And in essence, the implication for policymakers and researchers is that self-employment should be promoted to foster higher subjective well-being, and meanwhile also still open for future research. And concurring with the research scope and limitation section initially, basically the research scope is currently still limited and there are still room for future further research to expand its limitations. Thank you.